Please pray with me. Risen Christ, enter into our ears and our hearts and move us to take action on all that we know because of you. Amen. How many of you have ever gone through a change of season in your life where something definitely shifted? Yeah? A couple of you? Probably all of you. If you haven't yet, it will. Years ago, and I think I've told versions of this story before, so this should sound familiar to some of you, but years ago, my wife and I just knew that we would be in Indianapolis, Indiana for the rest of our lives. We just knew that we would be there and invest in that city and be a part of whatever was happening, whether I worked as a pastor for 10 more years or 20 more years or whatever. Even after that, we had this idea that we thought we had picked up on as we prayed about what was next, to be there. And then we ended up here. So it's important to always be humble about your deeply held convictions when you think you've heard something or sensed something or gotten an impression, because things can come your way that change everything. And it can be oftentimes for the best. Sometimes if we doggedly pursue that idea we had, no matter what, sometimes we're not just being persistent, we're being stubborn. Oftentimes the Lord offers us different options, different ways of being, different opportunities. And sometimes He tells us just enough to get us far enough to realize that there's yet another thing to pay attention to. Because if we had known the whole plan from the beginning, we would have never gone for it. So here we are in St. Louis. Oftentimes things happen that change the direction of our futures. And they can be, and often are, really good things if we have the courage to step into them, to take them, to move into that opportunity, to move into that setting. We've all been at different phases of change in life at one point or another. For some, it was the beginning of a career. For others, it was the winding up of a career. For us, when we moved here, we also empty nested. Most of you have been through that. At some point, your last child moves out, and you look at your spouse, if you're married, and you go, "Whoa, who are you?" And hopefully, there's enough left of a relationship from attending to the raising of kids to still have a reason to continue on being together. And some couples have a little bump in the road and then they move on. Other couples, it takes on a very different and darker path as they don't necessarily dive in and do the work to recover what they may have lost as they orbited too much around the kids and not enough around their relationship. That's one of those transitions, one of those opportunities that we face in life. The ending of a career, the beginning of children being out of the house, whatever order that takes place for you. The beginning of retirement, another transition where a new future lays out, and we've all got a picture in our heads of what that could look like and we want it to look like, and sometimes it goes that way. And sometimes it goes that way and it still wasn't what we thought it would be. Because what we had in mind and the reality of that, even if it actually is fulfilled the way we thought it would, suddenly it doesn't satisfy so much. You see, the culture around us gives us these ideas about what we ought to be doing at different phases of life. They hand us this vision of what it should look like when you're just getting married, or when you're well into raising children and building a career, or what it looks like when you're winding down toward the end, or what it looks like when the kids leave and it's just the two of you, or what it should look like when you retire. The culture hands us these narratives, some of whom are okay. Some of them are, frankly, not worth it. One of the narratives our culture hands us about being empty nested or being retired is this image that almost looks like, frankly, amusing ourselves to death. This event, this activity, this trip, that trip, and all those things inherently are good in moderation, but ultimately we still need to be about stuff that matters, even if we have the added flexibility to do more of the things we wish we could have done earlier, but now we can get to. We still need to be about things that matter. We crave significance. We're built to crave significance. The one who made all of creation and made human beings built us to crave significance and meaning at every phase of life. And most of you resonate with what I'm saying right now because you, late in life, decided to do something crazy like start a church. It's not so crazy. Not so crazy at all. You're at a different position in life, most of you, than others who might do this at different stages of life, to decide where to invest your time, your money, your talents, and where to still continue to enjoy yourselves and spend time with family. You can still do many of those same things, but it becomes a question of what does it look like? What's the best vision of that going forward? And how do we make sense of this season of life so that we give it not what the world hands to us, but we give it our all. We give it our all and we give it to Christ. The news of the resurrection has a lot to say about different stages and changes in life. It really does. If you look at today's text you just heard from Mark's Gospel, it ends on kind of a sour note. I mean, Bob got it right. He read the appointed text. It ends with, and they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Sometimes that happens. We get to a close of a stage of life, and we're maybe relieved to see things change, whether it's the kids moving out or a career ending up and retirement beginning or whatever it may be. We're excited to see some change happen, but we're also a little anxious about, is it going to really be what I hope it's going to be? Is this new phase of life going to be all I envision? And what if you get thrown a curveball? What if things happen later in life, in the back nine of life, that isn't what you expected? Then what do you do? Today's text is an example of that. It is, because while Jesus had talked about his betrayal, death, and resurrection on multiple occasions, every time he said that, it confused people. They didn't know what he meant. They didn't know what he was up to. It made no sense. How can you be king of the world? How can you be God's Messiah and be dead? And what's this about rising from the dead? I mean, what? It was confusing. It was a new idea for that culture. They believed in a resurrection of the dead at the end of all things, but they weren't thinking this was the end of all things. And one guy coming back from the dead, they didn't have a category in their brains for that. It made no sense at all. And so when he would say that, most of the time, people would get really confused or just a little angry because it didn't make sense. And people don't like to be confused, so some people, when they get confused, they just get mad. And so when this actually happened, they were still scratching their heads. The women go to the tomb. They're expecting to find a body to finish embalming. They carried spices with them. They're expecting to do one more last act of kindness to a dear friend who tragically just died. They're not going there expecting to find, as he said, a resurrection. They were still piecing that together. It was an unexpected twist. Even though he had said it, even though he'd made it plain, it was such a new idea, there just really wasn't even a holder in their brains for that idea. And so when it finally happened, their reaction was fear. The stones rolled away, good. Now they can go and embalm the body. They go and they take a look, and there's an angel sitting there. A man dressed in white who looks at them surprised. Why are you surprised? The tomb is empty. He said he would die. He said he would be resurrected. They could not believe their eyes. And today's text ends with, fear and trembling and astonishment seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Afraid as we often get when we come up on a transition point in life. The unknown is a scary thing at times. We would almost rather determine a path, even if it's artificially determined, and make something happen, even if it's not the best decision, just to have something known. We'll often make poor decisions as people just to have control over, or at least the illusion of control over what's next, rather than just take things as they come. one step at a time as it's presented. And what happens in today's text, in today's resurrection text, is one of those events where the unexpected literally happens. I know he told them, but they never registered what it meant. Fear and astonishment seized them, for they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Well, that's one ending. If you've read your Bible recently, got Mark's Gospel, or if you have it with you right now, if you take a look, you'll see there are words that continue after that, and some editors format it differently. There's actually another shorter additional ending. There's another ending to Mark's Gospel. Ooh, scandal. Not really. It's always been there, or at least nearly always. And then if you keep reading, there's another longer ending. And if you take a look at it, there's actually 3 different endings to this Gospel. And of course, the real pragmatist in the room is like, well, which one's the right one? That someone said earlier in the fellowship time, is there a dumb question? Not usually. But there are less good questions, let's put it that way. Which one's the right one is a less good question. The better question is, why are there 3 different endings to this gospel? Anybody play golf? Show my hand. Many people play golf. I'm committed to learning this game. I keep putting it off, but I need to learn this game. But the thing about golf that people tell me about is that it's this wonderful mixture of hard work, practice, skill, and dumb luck. Is that about right? It can be wonderful and satisfying and maddening all at the same time. You can do everything right and something entirely unexpected still happens. I say that with authority not because I know golf, but because I do know other sports. And anything involving a ball and other people is going to have moments where you've got some things that you can contribute uniquely. You've got some work that you can do to prepare. And then there's other people. And then there's just whatever you call that happens that was completely unexpected when someone takes a swing at this little ball. Mark wrote 3 different endings, or the church collected 3. I don't know how it happened, but the church ended up with 3 different endings. And I think it's a deliberate attempt to communicate something really profound. And it's really important for us to think about as we look at what stage of life are you in? Are you right in the thick of raising kids? Are you coming near to the end of it? Are you coming near winding down a career? Or are you one of those people that says, I'm never retiring? Well, good for you. The retirement's not in the Bible, actually. Interesting idea to just keep working with whatever capacity you have for whatever place you can. That's also a valid, wonderful idea. Are you in the place where you've definitely retired and you're trying to figure out how to make sense of it? It's not what you thought it would be. Maybe it's better. Who knows? Mark's gospel ends with version 1, which I hope you don't choose. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Clearly they said something to somebody, because 2,000 years later, we're still here. Right? There's still us hearing this story, talking about this story. But that is an option many people do take with their faith and with life. They remain silent about what they believe, and when it comes to transitioning to whatever's next in life, they play it as absolutely safe as possible. Nothing is risked. No chances taken. But then there's another account where they did tell the other disciples, and then the account ends. So they told somebody. And there's a longer account where Jesus meets with them later on after meeting with other people and gives them a very straightforward and very clear commission for what they're about to do, to share with this world his life-giving news, that he is risen, and those who trust in him have life eternal. 3 different options. One rooted in fear and caution, an excessive abundance of caution. And 2 others where something happened, some movement took place. Some chances were taken, some actions were taken. And if you think about where you are in life, where do you lean to typically? And what's the best choice, most of all? You see, as people who have heard this good news of Jesus' resurrection, it's often tempting to fall into the trap of thinking, well, this resurrection story, this life after death thing, well, that's all fine after I die, but what does it matter until then? Well, it matters a lot, because when they first heard this news, the women who first saw the empty tomb, the men who later heard about it and confirmed it, and all the things that happened, it changed their lives from the moment they heard the news. From the moment they knew that he is alive, that he is risen from the dead, just like he said, and all the pieces finally snapped into place, and they had this aha moment where it finally clicked together. From that point forward, their lives were never the same. This isn't just insurance for later on after you die. That's not the Christian faith. This is a news that affects us from the point we hear it, and we rehear it again, and it has another level of meaning. We rehear it again, and it clicks in another part of our heart, and we hear it again and again and again, and we begin to realize, like the people that first heard this news, they got to do something about that. Like now, there are people who don't know this. There are people running around trying to lead their lives, taking whatever script is handed to them by the world around them. And sometimes those scripts are very predictable and boring and, frankly, life-numbing about what to do next in life, how to handle the next phase of transition. Like the world hands us a script, and if we're just the type that follows along with the crowd, then I guess you can do that if you want to. You can let fear and terror and poison you and paralyze you if you want. But then there's this possibility that exists for those who know Christ, and for those who trust that he is risen from the dead, and that matters. From the point that the women heard this, it mattered to them. From the point that the men first heard this as he walked along the road to Emmaus, it changed things for them. They thought it was over, those two men. And then Jesus found them, walked alongside them, and explained to them the entirety of the Scriptures about how it connected to him. It was all about him. It was all about God's plan to redeem and save the world, to save people from living out mind-numbing, life-sucking scripts that the world hands them, to save them from pointlessness and wasted opportunities, to save them from amusing themselves to death instead of doing something meaningful and useful. It mattered. Jesus meets with them in the longest ending of Mark's Gospel later on and gives them a commission, which they then began to follow out and do. A commission, a way of living that changed the world, a way of living that resulted in the fact that we're here today hearing this good news. It's been passed on from generation to generation to generation. And every generation gets to ask this question, does it matter today for me or not? As I think about the next phase of life, whatever phase of life you're in, does the gospel, does the good news about Jesus make any difference at all? And if so, what? We have a community of faith here that started by a bunch of people in their back nine of life, in the later years of life, really wanting to lay claim to that idea that God has yet plans for them and for the church, that God has a use for a people who want to create a space, a Christian community for people to hear the good news and not just pine away for one day, find the by and by when it comes to pass years later when we die, but actually to realize that this faith means something today. And this good news about Easter means something today. It lays claims on our life to either be silent about it and walk away, or to engage it and live it and be a part of that joyful good news. The good news of this day is that Christ is risen, and that news changes everything starting right now. Amen.